So I'm going to record even though I'm just going to delete the thing. Okay, so ceramics is fired clay. Anything you make out of clay and then fire is ceramic. So that means we're talking about functional things like cups and bottles and such. We're also talking about things that have no function other than because they, make you smile or not, depending. I don't know, this might scare you a little. I don't know. Whatever. Just to look at, so sculpture is all included. I do have a sculpture class, and the functional difference, the practical difference between my ceramics class and my sculpture class is that in my beginning ceramics class, we focus mostly on basic skills for making, and we focus a little more on functional stuff you can use. And in my sculpture class, it's a little more about the design, and we don't mess with the wheels, and nothing actually has to be useful in any way, although it still can be. So this is called a wedging table, and when you get your brand new clay straight out of the bag, you don't really need to do this much, but you do just a little bit to kind of loosen it up. As you start using the clay, you'll need to wedge the clay because you'll need to mix it up evenly. So if you've got some wet stuff and some dry stuff, a little bit. When it sticks, you wedge it. This stuff is concrete board. It pulls water out very quickly. So if you leave your clay sitting on here, it'll actually dry it out a little bit too much. But while you're wedging, it'll stick right at first, but then you scrape it up and it won't be too wet anymore. Especially when you're working on the wheels, clay gets really wet. This helps to dry it out, mix it evenly, and it removes any air bubbles. Air bubbles cause minor issues when you're hand building and sculpting, and they cause really major issues when you're working on the wheel. So one of the first things I'll do is teach you how to wedge. And then we'll start with some hand building. Teach you basic hand building techniques. So, with the grease that you get in here, your clay tends to dry out fairly quickly, so I like to get it all ready to use and then bag it up just a little bit. And then loosen up the clay. Because this is brand new, I don't need to wedge very much. It's already been wedged, I'm just kind of loosening it up. Later on, you need to wedge about 10 times as much as I just did. So, 3 basic hand building techniques. We've got posters of them up here: pinch, coil, and slab. Pinch is you take the clay, you stick your thumb in it, and then you start to pinch, and then you go around in a circle, and that starts to open it up, and you're trying to learn to control the clay, make it consistent thickness, and get it to go into the shapes you want without excessive cracking, and that you'll be able to fix cracks so that they stay fixed when we do that. That's a quick pass-off thing. You don't keep your pinch pot unless it's part of your coil project that we do later. The plan for these is to do monster mugs and or creature mugs. Because if I tell you you can make anything you want to, you all make the same stupid, ugly, not quite as nice as you wanted it to be, but boring shaped pinch pot. And that's an exaggeration. But it's, I had a lot better, I was a lot more pleased with the results than so were my students when I gave them something a little more specific. If you have a really great idea that doesn't fit an assignment I give you, run it past me. I'll let you know if it will teach you the same basic things that I want you to learn, and will probably allow you to go ahead and do that. In a minute, I'm going to kick you out of that seat, but you can just grab the chair there and sit over across when I do, or now. That's good too. Okay, so see, it's kind of this lumpy little bowl shape. This is good enough for pass off. This wouldn't be a finished project because like if you look at the little thing up on the top, pretty much all Native American pottery, if you've ever seen any Native American pottery, like really gorgeous, like Pueblo pottery and stuff, that's all hand built, and it's perfectly symmetrical and smooth, and that's what we go for, at least as close as we can get to it. So that's pinch. Next we'll talk about slipping and scoring and compressing, which is how you get chunks of clay to stick to each other. We've got scoring tools, which scoring is just some sort of scratching. Slip is a mix of clay and water. And usually I like to mix a little bit of water with the clay I'm working with instead of having a separate jar of slip. Nearby there are a few exceptions, but for the most part that's my preference, and so that's what I'll teach you. It also means that you don't ever say, oh well, I couldn't attach my clay because I didn't have any slip in my house. Clay, water, that's it. So you roll out coils. They're like the little snakes that you used to make out of Play-Doh when you were a kid. And if you didn't get to make snakes out of Play-Doh when you were a kid, I'm sorry that you were deprived, and we can make up for it now. So you've got your coil, and you're going to add some water. I often do this with a toothbrush because it holds the water a little bit and mixes it in with the clay pretty easily, so it makes them slip. It also adds really, really mild score marks, but that's not slipping and scoring. That's mostly just creating slip. Scoring is making a bunch of scratch marks, preferably in a cross-hatching pattern. The softer the clay is, the less you have to do this. So in this case, that's a little bit of overkill. As the clay gets stiffer, you need to do it a lot more. Then you attach the coils like so, all the way around. You want them to overlap instead of butt up against each other. If you make it a little bit short and add it towards the inside, it'll make the shape start coming in. If you add it towards the outside, it'll make it come out. You can always control the way you're pinching it to change that either way. Usually when I add coils, I blend the inside edge on my first time around, and then I'll blend the outside edge afterward, and often I will add a few coils before blending the outside, which we usually do with a rib, which is one of these, or one of these, or one of these. These are all ribs, and oddly enough, this one's called a metal rib, and this one's called a wooden rib, and this one's called a rubber rib. There's a lot of new terminology, but we try not to get too technical when we can avoid it. So you do that, and you can make that into any shape you feel like. The green head on the end there that this half of the room can see, that was a pinch pot. The top of the head was a pinch pot, then it was coil built the rest of the way. And the ones next to it were made in different ways. So this is just a way of making things. Your finished project should not show coils like this, it should be all smoothed and prettified so that it's one consistent surface. It's just a way of making things taller, because you can only pinch so far before you run out of finger length. So that's pinch and coil. Then slab is, you make slabs of clay and then you put them together into shapes. One good way to make slabs, we've got a slab roller and we've got rolling pins. I like to throw out slabs when I'm not using the slab roller. And there are a few advantages to this. It's also one of those things that takes a bit of practice, so I want you to practice, but in the end, I want you to make a good slab, and however you need to, which includes using whatever tools. So try throwing out a slab at one point, but if you use the slab roller for all of your slabs, that's cool too. So as you throw it, if this edge hits first, the momentum of the rest of the clay will stretch it out. If it makes a really big loud slap noise, then it probably stuck a little bit. So you want it to kind of go like this. It also did that weird foldy wrinkly stuff. This right here, that's an air bubble, so is that. And so air bubbles do cause issues. So what would I do to fix those air bubbles? What? So I do pop the air bubbles.
Well, like you just said,
It's so this look on my face isn't that was a dumb idea. It's I didn't giggle.
Okay, so like with like the air bubble, right? You just like use like pop the air bubbles.
Okay, so yeah, in the right now I would pop it. Right, you can see when I push on it, it kind of moves around. So if I stab it with something, usually a needle tool, this pencil is closer, and then I kind of squish it all out. Then it made a dent, and I can work on fixing it from there. To prevent it in the first place, what do I do more of? Is wedging. That's what I did before they threw air bubbles. So yeah. So you do this. You cut it into whatever shape you needed it to be, and you can work with it soft and make nice rounded forms. And you know, if you make a perfect cylinder that's a perfect circle, circles are a pain to make. It's really hard to make them perfect, and it's really easy to tell when they're not. Simplify things for yourself and at least make it an oval. Because then, you know, if it ends up a little bit of an egg shape, you can pretend it was meant to be. If a circle ends up with a corner on it, circles don't have corners, that's stupid. But you can, if you're starting to get corners, you can't make them go away, say, oh, well, I'm going to make this a little bit square here. And then, just for fun, I'm going to make it more of a triangle at the bottom, and that's cool. Or you can have it twist, do whatever else you want. And then you stick it on another slab. Here, I'll show you how to blend. You kind of make it go like that. And when you put two joints together like this, you slip and score right here, which I already showed you, so I'm going to skip that bit for time's sake. And then you will reinforce that bit with a coil. Every time you have a 90-degree joint like this, and if you can't see what my hands are doing right now, stand up, move around until you can, because I'm looking over here and I can't see your faces, and I'm not doing this. So you'll have a coil, you blend half of it down, the other half into the side, and that will reinforce it. Then you smooth it all the way out, and you end up with some, let's see if I had a slap rod there a little bit, but this part was thrown on the wheel, this part was hand built, and there was some, some slabs and some various other things that went into play. This was a slab. But yeah, the others I don't have, they're not handy, they're slabs. So that's pinch, coil, and slab, your three hand building techniques. We'll start with those. And then we'll move on to the wheel. This would have a whole bunch of air bubbles in it at this point, which is why I'm grabbing the clay that I got ready earlier. And we're going to do two basic wheel projects, you will spend a good amount of time working on the wheel, just getting this first bit figured out, which is centering, and how to get the clay in the middle, to stay in the middle. And the really hard thing about working on the wheel, when you're hand building, if you are a bit clumsy and keep messing it up towards the beginning, you can spend a little more time towards the end, assuming you keep your clay wet enough that you can finish it out and make it work with just spending a little bit more time. If you start out with something that's all off center on the wheel, it's not going to get better by working at it more. It's just going to make a big mess and spread out and go all over the place. So you really need to grab a towel. Maybe on the first day of class I shouldn't be entirely covered in clay. Being covered with clay would at least be a good way of setting expectations for later. So, the wheel, whenever you're cleaning your wheel, there's no reason to scrub your wheel like this, because you can just spin it and go like that. These white ones are really, really quiet, which is why I demo on them, because there's enough background noise as it is, but some of yours are going to be a lot noisier, and sorry about that. Okay, so throw it down. The wheel was damp. If it's too dry, sometimes the powder won't really stick. If it's too wet, it'll just slide around. So damp is about perfect. If it starts sliding around, you need to wedge up your clay to mix that slip that's on the surface back into the rest of the clay before it'll stick again. I kind of squish it down some more and push it a little closer to the middle just to save myself a little bit of work later on. Then everybody right now, take your elbow, your left elbow, whether you're right or left-handed, stick your left elbow. If you can, touch your belly button with your left elbow. I can't, so that's about as close as I can get, and then it starts sliding over here. And if it's not on your belly button, then put it down and brace it in your hip joint, and then try and move the heel of your hand by moving your body forward to the center of the wheel like this. If you need to scoot in closer, that's why when we go over all of the other stuff, we have different dress code stuff in here. We don't do skirts. You need to bring some gym shorts if you're going to wear skirts and dresses and kilts or whatever. And just because you have to spread your legs and scoot as close as possible, and you know, the dresses aren't made for that. And I don't like arguing as to whether the dress is going to show your crotch. We just don't go there. You brace here and you're moving your body forward. Then you get a little bit of water on the clay, and this part I'm just kind of moving that water around to make, what's a mix of clay and water? Slip. Mud is not a bad answer, but slip is the specific one I was looking for. So, clay and water, you make slip. As the slip starts to get sticky instead of slimy, you add a little bit more water. You don't wash away the old slip, you just keep the slip that's on there nice and wet and slimy. So we do that, and then I lean into it, put some body weight into it, and you can see the clay wants to go up. If I do that too much, see those little wrinkles right there? That's where there's a little bit of friction here. If I do that too much, or I grip it too much out here, it's going to tear off. So I push it down with this hand, and that's going to make the clay want to go wide and short. And I put pressure in both of those places at the same time, and it can't go anywhere but the center. And we get it all, the top will center first. Notice this is all nice and centered, it's all nice and centered, and then there's a little bit of a wobble right there down at the base. That's very typical. There are various ways to get rid of that. Sometimes you can even just kind of cut cut it away like that, but we'll work on, that's what you'll spend, before you pass off centering, that's what you'll spend most of your time doing, is figuring out how to get that last little bit centered, and figuring out how to keep braced. Most of the time you brace right here and then you push with your arm, figuring out how to push with your body and stay braced. And then you'll do an entry and opening. This is the way I like to do it. There are lots of different ways that all work on entry and opening. This is the way I teach. If you figure out another way, that's cool. And if you look up, there's even a few different hand positions and different ways to center. The real problem is when you mix them half and half. And there's good reasons for it. So try it my way all the way. And if that's not working for you, try, I've got demos online and you can find your own, and try the other way all the way, but don't go half and half. Also, if you're left-handed, you use your left hand here, right hand on top. If you're right-handed, you use your left hand here and right hand on top. And then when I tell you to switch for pulling up, you switch, whether you're right or left-handed, because it has to do with the way that the wheel is rotating, not which is your dominant hand. You have to use both, and you might as well learn it the way that it's done in the Western world. In Asia, the wheels all go the other direction, and they have just as many right-handed people, and if anything, they're better at it than we are, so there's no disadvantage for left-handed people. They've, at least in China, they've been making really nice wheel-thrown pottery for 3,000 plus years, and in the Western world, it took them a lot longer to figure all that out. You have to compress the bottom across there, and this will be another pass off. So you'll pass off centering and you'll pass off this, that it's still short, still centered, and it's ready to turn into, in this case, a cylinder. Your bowls will be a little bit different. Then you're gonna switch hands, left hand inside now, right hand outside, push down against the base. I like to use the sponge here, brace your hands together, and make a dent down at the bottom, and then lift your fingers without, it's not so much of a squeeze as it is keeping your fingers the same distance apart as you lift. Notice when I came off the top, my fingers didn't snap together, because if you're just squeezing down at the bottom where it's really thick, you have to squeeze kind of hard, and then about halfway up, you don't have to squeeze as hard, but you're not sure how much softer to squeeze and you tear off a big donut. If that happens to you, you're normal, but you did something wrong, and so keep adjusting until you can pull up without getting a donut and a plate. Then you go back down. It's still kind of volcano shaped on the outside, mostly cylinder shaped on the inside. So it's kind of coming in a little bit on the inside, coming out a little bit on the outside. That means it's really thick at the bottom than at the top. So we're going to go back down to the bottom, squeeze in there, make another dent, and lift the clay up. And you notice it started wobbling for a second right there? It's when my finger dried out too much. And it also tended to make a thin spot there because it dried out and the friction made it do that. So be careful of it drying out too much. And I also stopped moving my hand as soon as it started wobbling, and I just kind of held still, no squeezing, but just holding still until the wobble, for the most part, went away. And then I'm going to go back, get it wet again, and finish thinning that area right there. So you don't have to start it all the way at the bottom and move all the way to the top. If you've got a problem section in the middle, do the problem section in the middle. If the problem section in the middle is it's too thin, then you'll probably just need to start over or cut off everything above where it's too thin. This does still have, it's still a little bit dry in there, so I'm just getting it wet. I don't want to puddle down on the bottom, but I want it all slimy across the inside. So it's got slip all across the inside. Also notice while I was doing that, I stretched it out a little bit. So now I'm going to get it all slimy on the outside and squeeze it back in. Just a little bit at a time. And as long as the wheel is spinning, deforming it like that isn't a problem. See, it stays circular as soon as I let go. If I stop it while I'm doing that, it stays deformed. So, the rule of thumb is don't touch your clay unless the wheel is spinning. when you're working on the wheel. And then after each time you pull up to the top, you can press the rim. So you kind of squeeze here and push down here. It's more of a, when you try and squeeze here, it wants to go up and you don't let it, rather than pushing down hard. If you push down hard, it'll make wobbles worse. There's still quite a bit of thickness down here, so let's see if we can get it. It's at least a lot thicker down here than it was up there. If you guys get it to this point, you'll probably just leave it and trim off that extra thickness. But the more you get pulled up, the less time you have to spend trimming. So I like to pull up as much as possible. Plus, I'm not going to show you trimming today because it needs to have time to get all leather hard and stuff. And then at this point, we can play around with the shape. So if I want this to be, I'm pushing out as I go out there, and then I'm going to bring it back in a bit. The outside hand does most of the control of the shape. Now, if I wanted to bring this all the way into a bottle, I should have left this rim thicker. If I try and bring it in when it's this thin, it'll start wrinkling and folding. So I can make this, give it a little bit of shape, but I can't go too far with it. And so on your cylinders, and because you want to be able to see what the inside looks like and the outside at the same time, you know, you can change the shape, you know, like to this kind of extent, but don't try and make like a bottle or other random shapes. Take your metal rib at this point, and you can push the clay out into your rib to control that shape even more. So you bend the rib into the shape that you want it. You kind of see that in that on the TV. Not really. I wonder. Yeah, that's better. So if I go like this, you can see a little bit better what I'm doing. And then I'm kind of pushing the clay into that rib. It's really awkward that way. So, and then I can also use the rib like my outside finger. So when I'm pulling up, my fingers aren't directly across from each other. The outside hand is just below the inside hand. So the clay is kind of snaking between. That way it doesn't get so much friction that it tears it off. So I can do the same thing over here and still use that rib to get that nice clean shape, but be able to bring it in. And then I can come in here, leave that little edge, but sharpen it up a little bit, bring it up to there, and then we do paper towel trick. So there's always paper towel around, and you can just take a little tiny piece of your paper towel, so something vaguely like this. Fold it a couple of times. If I can let go of that piece. Fold it like this a couple of times so that it's got a little bit of extra thickness. It's a little strap like that. And I'm not doing this, but I'm making a little arch with it, and I'm squeezing with the sides of my fingers like I do when I compress. I squeeze the sides and push down, but here I'm going to squeeze the sides and then just scrape that across the top, and it makes it all pretty. Takes off the excess slip and then smooths out what's left, so that it's all prettified. And then double check to make sure I've got all of the water out of the bottom, water and slip out of the bottom. And if I don't really like the shape, if I really like the shape of the outside but not the inside, that's backwards. You want to make the inside the shape that you want. You can trim the outside to match it later. That'll make sense at other points. And then I'm going to take a potter's knife, scoop away a little bit of the excess clay right there, then use the sharp bit to scoop away a little bit more. This is going to save me time later when I go to trim. I don't have that excess clay. It also makes it so that when I pick it up, it's not stuck down as badly, and importantly, it's got enough of an undercut that I can get my fingers underneath it so that when I go to pick it up, I don't have to squeeze, because if I squeeze, I'm going to squish it, and you know, it'll stay all squished. Oh, wire. So then I take my wire tool. Some of them are fishing line, some of them are actual wire. You wrap it around until it's a decent width so that you don't bump it and you don't hit the splash pan on the sides. And you get the wheel going slowly, push down, make sure you don't try and follow around the wheel, hold still for a second, and then pull straight across towards yourself. And clean and dry your hands, then pick it up and set it typically on a bat, which are those wooden things over there, but again, for sake of time, I'm just going to stick it there. And I put it on that concrete bit right there because that's porous, so it's not going to stick to it, and it kind of sucks the water out a little bit. Okay, so you get your cylinders done. We'll also do handles. No, let's see. 908. Ooh, I might even have time to do a handle for you. Ha! That'd be awesome. So next bit is going to be bowls. Bowls are sometimes easier to do, but if the clay tends to want to go out instead of up. And so a lot of people just want to do bowls because the clay goes out every time. But bowls have a different tricky part, and I like to make bowls by pulling them up and then stretching them out because it's easier to control that way. And I found that if you start out by pulling things out every time, pulling up is even harder to learn than it is in the first place. So we start with cylinders and then move on to bowls. So you're going to get, centering is going to be the same thing though, so no new learning there. Grab this clay down at the bottom. I'm going to push that up. That's one of the ways to take care of it. I take the wobbly clay at the bottom and push it up higher to where I know I can center, and then make sure there's plenty of slip all over the place and some decent amounts of pressure. You can also squeeze the whole outside to cone it up, and if you're braced while you're doing that, it should stay pretty centered. So if you brace here and you just kind of squeeze that way, it'll stay pretty well centered and it helps center it. If your hands are just like this, it's not going to center it because your hands will just go around. It's not a matter of strength, it's the